We've looked at the past government programs like Yoga and how much they've done for society. So today we are going to look at something that is still pertinent to us, and that is COVID-19 and how the real economy has performed. So our topic for discussion today, ladies and gentlemen, to read it verbatim, reads Economic Resilience Amidst COVID-19 Pandemic, how the real economy performed. To discuss this topic, we have some very prominent, distinguished ladies and gentlemen from the community that will help us dissect from their experiences, from the different fields they operate in, and we can have a discussion on that. I will first of all remind you that you have to subscribe to this channel because such discussions are so many. So just go to the YouTube channel, subscribe, and then you can always get notifications for these discussions, the one of the youth, the one of the ladies, and all these other things that are, I have no iota of doubt, are very pertinent to us as a society. So let me introduce my panel. We are joined, ladies and gentlemen, by 4 distinguished members of the community. The first one is John J. Wasiche. Wasiche is a farmer of vegetables, mainly watermelon, green pepper, eggplants, green pepper, and he also adds value to coffee, tea leaves, and spices. The second panelist is going to be Muhire Francis, who is an economics lecturer at Makerere University Business School, that is MUBS. He also joins us and he will share with us his knowledge, since this is an economics-based topic for discussion. We are then joined by Zawedde Hasinah, who is the chairperson of Wandegeya Cooperative Society, a circle for street vendors. Last but not the least is Betty Namaye, who is the chairperson of the Acholi Community Society. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the panel we have that will help us understand this topic. So we are discussing the resilient economy, the economy that survived and how it performed in the face of COVID-19. COVID-19 is now a common thing that we all know. But just to give you a brief background, in about November 2019, doctors in Hubei province of China, particularly the city of Wuhan, were met with a strange disease that presented signs like flu, cough, fever, and it was claiming lives. It seemed, being new, they thought it was the SARS, the initial SARS, but it turned out to be a bit different from the first one. And then research was done. At that point, doctors were giving it all their best that they could in China, true to the hypocritical oath that they swear to save and protect lives. But nothing much was being done. As far as saving lives is concerned, as many people kept dying. And in no time, there was a fear that this disease would spread around the world. People were terrified, people were fearing. And yes, that turned out into a prophecy, because months and weeks later, we had COVID announced across the world, countries like the UK, countries like Italy registering several cases, America, and then took the lead with so many deaths, so many cases. In Uganda, it was on the on Saturday, the 21st of March, that we registered our case number 1, or what they call the case 0. It turned out to be a trader who had gone to Dubai for shopping, and upon return, he was checked and found to be with COVID-19. But even before we got that very case, Uganda had taken steps to keep COVID away, to keep COVID at bay. And the most prominent of these was the lockdown. The lockdown was instituted and schools were closed. In fact, all sorts of public gatherings were closed, including churches, mosques, and things like markets were allowed to operate, but under strict, newly introduced special operating procedures that saw the resilient market ladies sleeping in the markets for days. That was the round 1 of the lockdown, and it did the magic, depending on how you look at it, because cases went down, the economy was opened, we even had an election that brought together so many people and all that, though the scientists warned that that signaled the possibility of a second wave, and they didn't get it wrong. A second wave came. We had a 42-day lockdown that saw most of the economy again closed. This time around, people stayed home just like the first time. Schools were closed. And after the 42 days, many feared there would be an extension, but there wasn't. Much of the economy has since been opened, save for a few things, like we still have the curfew in place, we still have schools not operational. But there is still a fear that we may actually be headed for a third wave. And people have used terms like the new normal in reference to COVID, saying that you have to just adopt and live with these things. They're here to stay and they'll be here. The best bet now countries are taking is vaccination. But Uganda has hardly vaccinated 1.5% of the population. That means that we still have a long way to go. Now, joining me is the panel that I introduced earlier. They are going to discuss this topic. We are going to look at how the economy has tried to survive in the face of COVID. What lessons do we learn from this? How do we go forward? Currently, I mean, in case there's a third lockdown or there's a third wave, and then that will, of course, lead to a third lockdown. But even post-COVID, 20 years from now, what lessons should we learn from now that we can live with? So I'll begin by asking the panelists each the first round of questions, and the first panelist that will answer our question tonight, our dear esteemed viewers, is Mr. Muhire Francis. Mr. Muhire Francis, this is your question. As he locked down in 2020, the president made a distinction between the real, I'll quote that, economy and what he called the leisure economy. In the second group, that is the leisure economy, he placed things like tourism and sports activities. In the first group, he put things like markets, industry, and agriculture, which he said would continue to operate. As an economist, given that view that some part of the economy was closed, but some part of it was allowed to operate, just give us an overview of how badly hit our economy of Uganda has been because of the lockdown that is instigated because of COVID in the last 2 years. That is your question, sir.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, the moderator, for that question. Just as you said that the president, classified the economy into real and leisure economy, and prioritized the real economy over leisure economy. Of course, we saw him doing that, but you see, the economy it operates as a system, and the system has components. Once you broke one component, then the system won't operate, and that's why we've seen all this massive negative impact by the pandemic, the pandemic's lockdown. But of course, you also have to understand that some of those sectors of the economy had to be shut with what was going on. But just as we've seen, this pandemic has not only affected Uganda, but the global economy as a whole. And each country has suffered its share. And how much one economy or country has suffered depends on how countries came up with different measures or strategies to minimize the negative impact. So talking about Uganda's economy, the way we've handled this, and of course with the government having the biggest responsibility to make sure that the economy stays afloat, we've seen a lot happening. As you've said, the common measure used was the lockdown, to mitigate the spread or to flatten the spread of the COVID-19. But once you put a lockdown automatically puts the economic activity at a virtual halt. For example, you saw what happened the first lockdown and then the second lockdown. So the negative impact brought by this whole pandemic is really massive. For example, when you look at all the macroeconomic indicators, they will show that the economy is not doing well because of what is going on. So for example, even before I go to look at other usual macroeconomic indicators, talk about household incomes. According to the UNDP report of last year, it indicates that over 1.8 million households were pushed into extreme poverty and vulnerability, And when you talk of these households, each household in Uganda on average, according to Uganda Bureau of Statistics survey of last year, show that each household has about 4.5 individuals. But of course, you saw when the government tried to help the vulnerable poor, it only targeted on about 500,000 people. So why is this very important? That you have to care about, the household's incomes. Remember, as I've told you, that the economy or the economic activity, it's like a system. If the household's incomes have really depleted, then who's going to buy, the goods or pay for the services? You see, so when we talk of household incomes, really, we've been hit hard. Then when you look at the macro economic indicators, when we talk of economic growth, for example, we've seen Uganda's economic growth decline drastically. We are talking about projections of 2.5%, but before the pandemic broke out, our target was about 7%, and we were doing well because in 2019 we had about an economic growth rate of 6.8%. So, but now we are talking of 2.3%. Even it might go below that, because COVID is still here. So when you talk of another macroeconomic indicator, when you talk of unemployment, we saw in the first lockdown, over 2.5 million people packed, they lost their jobs. That was only in the first lockdown. We saw over 300 companies closing down. And of course, with this second lockdown, more people are being laid off. So the number might even go up to 3.5 million, according to the estimates. Even when you talk of the balance of payments, how much as a country or an economy we are selling outside Uganda or what we are receiving. Also, the balance of payments were affected, especially in the first lockdown, because we saw the supply chains being disrupted globally. For example, when we talk of China, who is our biggest international trade partner, we saw volumes in terms of goods and services coming in reducing drastically. So,
okay. Yeah, just a second. Thank you, Mr. Muhire. When you say things like industry, companies are shutting down, our balance of payment is no longer favorable. I'm going to request that since this is a community webinar, there are those that want to understand that at the grassroots level. What does that mean for a market vendor? What does that mean for a taxi driver, in your own words?
Thank you. Maybe to take you back to, as we said, the real economy, the president said we are looking at the industry and then the agricultural sector. Talking of the market vendors, for example, when you put the lockdown, like in the first lockdown, we saw, the prices of agricultural perishable goods, talk of matoke, talk of eggs, their prices reduced by, over 50%. Even in the second lockdown. Why? Because when you put a lockdown, just as I've told you that a lockdown automatically creates or puts an economy at a virtual hold. I mean, you're talking of the hotels closed, you're talking of schools closed, because these are the big consumers of these agricultural perishable goods. So you've seen prices reducing, like in this lockdown, the price of matoke, from the farm gate prices were at 500 to 1,000, a bunch of matoke. So you can imagine the pain and the loss these farmers are going to meet, And unfortunately, when you talk of the measure the government has put in place, so far there is no any mechanism that has been put in place to help, let's say, those farmers that are meeting or incurring these costs because of the lockdown. Because here we are talking about the demand for these, let's say, agricultural perishable goods, the demand has, totally declined. So unfortunately, the government has not, for example, with all the mechanisms it has put in place, there is no specific, let's say, mechanism to help farmers to stay afloat in this situation. In fact, the president thinks that agriculture has not been affected, but it is one of the most hit, because when we talk of the prices for these goods declining by over 50%, when you talk of matoke at between 500 and 1,000, it's even at around 80%. So agriculture has been hit hard. Unfortunately, the government has not put any mechanism to help these farmers, and therefore the and therefore the effect is massive. Talking about balance of payments, balance of payment, this simply records what the country like Uganda, what we sell outside Uganda, like on the international trade or on the global market. Of course, Uganda, we have what we sell to other countries. That's what we call exports, Then we have what we also receive from other countries, and that's what we call imports. So when you compare the two, that's what we call the balance of payments. So as I said that in the first lockdown, for example, globally, all supply chains were disrupted. Therefore, we are not exporting as we are supposed to be exporting. Also, are not importing as much as we are supposed to be, importing. And all this will impact the economy, whether you're directly involved in international trade or not. As I said, the economy is just a system with different components. Money be moving from one hand to another, because we are looking at the circular flow of incomes and circular of incomes and spending. You're earning and spending at the same time. So the impact, the negative impact is really massive, and that is the cost or the price you pay for a lockdown. And before Mr. Moderator take on, I want to tell the public that while the lockdown is good, or is necessary, but it also depends on how you deploy the lockdown. Because, for example, if you put a lockdown in place, or according to the definition of a lockdown, a lockdown means that no one is entering an area or leaving the area. And yes, we've seen the airport is still. When you do that, that means that if you put the lockdown, then you may not have to limit people or restrict people within that boundary or within that area, because no one is leaving the area or no one is coming into this area. But we've seen for the case of Uganda, we still have those who are coming in. For the truck drivers, that was understandable because we need some goods, especially essential goods, to come in. It was understandable, and this would have required these truck drivers to be followed up. But when you got at the airport, we still have people coming in, and they are no longer put under quarantine. So meaning, this virus has a mutation. It has a mutation period or a window period of, let's say, 14 days. So if someone presents a negative, a certificate showing that they are negative, but after a few days, then they will test positive. So you have suffocated all the efforts to put lockdown in place, because you've restricted people within this area, within Uganda, but you still receive all these variants, new variants, wherever they are coming from. So, and that's why Uganda as a country, we've got it wrong. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. That was very elaborate. So let's move to the farmer, Mr. Wasiche. Mr. Wasiche, Mr. Muhire elaborated on, from the economics perspective, of how even the farmers that we thought, those ones are operating because they are our essential service providers, were affected by this. So I just want to understand from your perspective, your experience as a person in the field, as a farmer in this country, how badly or how much were you affected by the COVID-19 induced lockdown?
Am I clear? Are you getting me clearly?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Thank you very much, Toko. I'm glad to be hosted Civic Space TV. My name is John K. I come from a very beautiful place in Bugisu called Muhire. And like you can see in the background, I don't know whether you can see, I was locked at the farm and I've been here. Now, coming to your question of how badly or whether we've been impeded or not, I would like to honestly tell you that, like the president likes to, I would like to think that the president is out of reality, is out of touch with reality. I will honestly tell you, like how Francis has put it, that the farmers were terribly hit. Let me give you an example. 2 weeks before the 42-day lockdown, a 12-ton truck of watermelon was at 12 million. Now the farmer is given 11 million and the broker gets the 1 million. But after the lockdown, that same truck, they were buying it at 1.5 million. The broker gets 1 million and the broker gets 500,000, the farmer gets 1 million. So that is how terrible the situation is now. This thing called lockdown and somebody coming out to say that, the farmers were left to operate normally and so on and so forth. I'll tell you, first and foremost, who are the consumers of these things that we grow? These are people who are operating in malls, in Chikubo. They have their small kiosks. They're selling food in the markets. And these are places that were closed down. So that means that there were no people consuming these products. The tomatoes, for example, the tomatoes and the watermelons, people are not consuming them. And the other fact is that when you lock down or when there is a lockdown, people tend to spend, they tend not to have a lot of spending power. Because you see, we are now in very unprecedented and unpredictable times. Actually, as I talk now, other people are talking about a third lockdown, meaning that somebody may not afford to buy luxuries like watermelons, like tomatoes, and the like. Someone will rather go for things to do with posho, kaunga, and maybe some mukene to eat. As I'm talking now, the percentage of people who can afford meat in Uganda has drastically reduced because somebody cannot spend money on buying meat, yet he's not sure whether he's going to get 5,000 tomorrow or the other day. Okay. So I would like to honestly tell you that as farmers, we were deeply and heavily affected. Toko.
Yes, please.
Unless if there is anything else.
No, that's okay. That was very elaborate. Let's move to the next panelist, who is going to be Zawedde Hasinah. Zawedde Hasinah is the chairperson of a woman's vendors circle at Wandegeya. So we are going to ask her the same question. She should just tell us how much COVID affected their activities. We know that these are very resilient ladies who provide for their households. They work, they wake up in the morning and go sell whatever they sell along the streets. So how much did COVID affect people like you, Madam Zawedde? Madam Zawedde, you just unmute your microphone so that you can become audible. Hello, Madam Zawedde, just unmute your microphone. We can't hear you, eh?
Yes, sir. Ompulira kati.
Katukuwulira.
Ompulira.
Katukuwulira. Bulungi.
Lockdown yetukosezza. Yes, sir. Lockdown yetukosezza kubanga twali tusobola okukola nga tusevinga akasente kaffe naye kati tetukyasevinga. Abantu bonna obusevingi baabumalayo ku akawunti, betwawa looni tebalabikako kuba tebalina mirimu, abalala tebakola. Abakyala abamu kuba nze ndi mukyala omukulembeze ow'abakyala. Abakyala abamu basazeewo okukozesa emibiri gyabwe basobole okuyimirizaawo famire. Mu butuufu embeera etukosezza nnyo awatali gamba nti oba tuli mu mbeera nnungi terimba emmere era tugigula mu n'ow'okusula kubanga gavumenti yatuwa obutimba n'ebawa obutimba naye awantu we yeebaka bali mu mugotteko abaami abakyala bonna beemikisinze. Kale abakyala ne bamalibwako eddembe lyabwe ng'abakyala. N'abaami nabo tebalina ddembe kubanga tosobola kusula na mukyala atali mukyalawo n'ofuna emirembe. abaana abato bamaama abamu bayonsa abakyala abakola mu butale n'abakola ku nguudo tusalawo ne beebaka mu butale n'ababebi baabwe ensiri ne ziruma emisujja girumya abantu mu lockdown mu butuufu obuzibu bwe tuyiseemu buyitirivu ate era nga tukyabuyitamu olw'ensonga nti wadde ng'abamu entambula ey'olukale bazze ku mirimu naye tebalina ssente kakati owagenda najja n'akugamba mu butuufu siina ssente naye njagala kyakulya naawo bw'ogezaako okukwata ebintu byo n'ogamba kati nga ffe abakyala abatembeeyi odde ku kkubo KCCA naye ekifuukidde KCCA kati mu butuufu tetulina mbeera nnungi ebibiina tebigenda mu maaso olw'ensonga ti abantu tebalina ssente ompulira bulungi ssebo hello
ya tukuwulira nnyo tukuwulira
hello
tukuwulira maama
ssebo mu butuufu challenges nnyingi gye tusanze wangi challenges nnyingi okusomoozebwa kungi obutabanguko we tukolera mu maka gaffe kati kwegamba buli omu tutuuse ekiseera nga buli omu ali ku lulwe omwami omukyala abaana nga buli omu kyasanga kyakola mu butuufu mu lockdown tusomoozebwa nnyo tetukyaseevinga abaatwala looni tebaakomyawo kubanga tebalina ssente tebakola toyinza kumukaka ssente kuba talina gy'ayinza kuzijja ebibiina bigwiridde ddala mutuufu embeera yo yakusoberwa embeera yo si nnungi tuli mu mbeera mbi nnyo nga bw'okiwulira ese
ngenda kuddamu nkubuuza ekirala naye kati kamala okubuuza Betty. Betty?
Yes, sir.
Betty, are you with us? So this is your question now. If the president invited you today and said he wants to institute another lockdown because he fears that there's going to be a third wave.
Hello?
Betty Namaye. Yes, please, we can hear you. Yes, Betty, we can hear you, Namaye. So I was still structuring the question that if the president invited you today and said he thinks there is going to be a third wave in the next 3 or 2 weeks, and the best way to avert that is to institute a lockdown today or tomorrow. And then he said, what should I know before I institute this lockdown? What kind of advice would you give him? Mr. Muhire, looks like we have lost Betty. So I'm just going to channel that question to you. That given all you've said, given your experiences, given what you know economically, and as a lecturer, if the president invited you and said he wants to institute another total lockdown, closing public transport, closing private transport, closing most of the economy, in fear of a third wave that he says could hit the country in 2 to 3 weeks, what advice would you give him as he balances that tightrope between public health and the needs of the economy?
Yes, thank you, the moderator. First of all, personally, I've never supported the total lockdown because, as I've said, the total lockdown entirely puts the economic activity on a virtual hold. And while one might think that you're trying to save lives by putting people or locking them home, but we've seen that even there are those who have died because they are home, they cannot put food on their table, you know, people are depressed. So the problem is that we are not, you know, taking, you know, statistics for these other people who are dying from, you know, indirectly who are dying from, you know, this lockdown. You've seen people hanging themselves. But if we were to put all those statistics, even those, you know, when COVID came in, we've given much attention to COVID and forgot that if there are other diseases which are killing people. So if you had to compile and compute all these statistics, you're going to realize that actually the total lockdown, or putting much, you know, emphasis on COVID-19, then, you know, you're going to lose more lives. I mean, COVID-19 is not among the top 5 diseases that kill people in Uganda. I challenge everyone to go and find out that. You're going to realize that COVID is not among the top 5 diseases that are killing Ugandans. Therefore, for me personally, right off from the start, I wouldn't support for the total lockdown. I mean, this what we need, is to adopt and adjust, and change our, human behavior towards what is happening. I mean, if there are SOPs, everyone knows that you have to put on your mask, So that's all we need to tell Ugandans that this thing is real, even those who still think that or doubt that maybe COVID is not real. But for now, almost all Ugandans know that COVID is real. So that's why, for me, I wouldn't tell that, the president put another lockdown, but just put, more resources for sensitizing Ugandans and, to encourage them to change their behaviors so as to adjust to the new norm. Because we are going to be having COVID for a long time. According to scientists, they are anticipating that we might have COVID for more than between 5 to 9 years. So you can't keep on locking people for all that long. We have to accept that COVID is here. We have to take it like other diseases so that it is a personal responsibility to follow the SOPs, but let people be out there and work. Otherwise, we are going to realize that when it is already late, when we've lost too much resources, too much time, that people have to work regardless of, COVID-19 being in the equation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Mama Zawedde ngenda kuddewo. Ogambye nti muine ebizibu bingi lwa mbeera eriwo ya COVID. Mbadde njagala kumanya tulabye ebibiina ng'ebyabayimbi nga bigenda kulaba abakulu ba mu gavumenti babawaddemu ku buyambi awo ne wali. Kati mbadde nebuuza nti singa abantu nga ggwe abakola mu butale abatunda ebintu ne sakoyo, singa gavumenti egamba namwe yagala bayamba, mwandibadde mulooza nti ngeri ki esinga okubeera obulungi mu buyambi gavumenti gyesobola obawa? Mama Zawedde, okyali naffe?
Wangi ompulira ssebo?
Kati nkuwulira, mbadde mbuuza.
Hello?
Nkuwulira kati.
Mpulidde.
Owulidde ekibuuzo
kyekubuuza? Nkiwulidde.
Kale, kati kiddemu obulungi bama.
Naye nga kale ssebo. Neeyanziza. Kati kyensaba gavumenti engeri gy'ebeetuyambamu terewo ssente nga zakwewola tetwagala byakusabiriza bya bwereere, naye nga ssente ezo tuzizaayo ku magoba amatiniti, nga n'obukwakkulizo bwonna bwe bateekamu nti okuzifuna kola booti ne booti ffe tuli bibiina ebiwandiise era ne certificate tuzirina. Ereme tuteerawo nnyo obukwakkulizo ku ssente ezo abantu bange basobole ozeewola, naffe tusobole ozeewola, basobole okuddamu okukola obulungi, basobole okuyimirizawo ne families basobole okugwa, kubanga bwo tebugenda kuggwawo kati tetumanyi kunaggwawo ddi, basobole okweyimirira mu bbanga eritali ttono eddenedeneko naye nga n'obukwakkulizo obugaliko bukendeezebweko. Ekintu ekirala kyensaba gavumenti etuyambe, mubaamu ebintu by'otunuulira kati ebbeeyi y'ebintu eri waggulu ate ng'omuntu talina ssente. Tusaba gavumenti etukwasizeeko nga bannayuganda ffenna, etusasulirengako 10% naffe tusasuleko 10%. Katugeze nti kiro ya sukali ya 13, gavumenti etuyambe esooke etusasulireko 15,000 naffe tusasule 15,000, omuntu asobole okwetuuka tebalina ssente. Abakola kati ng'abano abatakisi tebalaba basaabaze. Kati abantu basalawo okwetambulira, batambuza bigere, basobole okufisawo akasente akalabirira kuyamba. Ejje enoonyereze paka ku muntu wa wansi singa oba eyina ekintu kyeyagala okuwa abantu ba wansi nga ffe. Eyitirenga ku LCs n'ebibiina kubanga buli kitundu kirimu ebibiina, mulimu round cash, mulimu cooperatives, mulimu associations. Balaba abo abakulembeze basobola okutuusa bulungi nnyo ekintu ku bantu baabwe kuba babamanyi okuva ku ground. Okusinga bw'anaabeera eri n'agamba nti gundi gabira bana ekintu kino bwekiti kalogeze ng'emmere oluusi tetuuka kubanga bali bwe bati bamanyi muntu wa wansi kati ffe nnyini bwe baba bayisangamu information eyo tusobole okugituusa ku bantu baffe kuba tubamanyi era tubategeera buli omu embeera ye era n'enfuna ye tugitegeera kati abantu baffe ng'abalema teri ayinza kumanya mulema kuva eri waggulu nze mumanyi kuba nze mmemba wange manyi ne bwasula manyi bwalya manyi bwabeera mu mbeera yonna esaba gavumenti etukwasizeeko naye ng'eyitira ddala ku muntu ffe owa wansi asobola otuuka ku muntu we kubanga tubamanyi era tulya nabo tubeera nabo nakyala gavumenti kyensaba efube kuli n'eddagala erizze basoboke bageme abaana baddeyo ku masomero abaana mu butuufu bafuuse abaana babeera ku street abawala bayiza emize emibi abaana abawala bakola ebikolwa ebitali bya myaka gy'olabibwa singa banaabeera ku ssomero abaana baffe bajja kuba bulungi mu butuufu omulanga gwange nkubira gavumenti mu bintu ebyo byonna bye njogedde ffe tuteerewo ssente nga zakwewola nga bwe nannyonnyodde tusobole naffe okwetusaako bye twagala tusobole okwegulira buli kimu kye twagala kyekyo kye mbadde nsinga okukubira gavumenti ompulira
kale enkulidde bulungi era oyogedde bulungi nnyo maama kati ngenda saba nti oggyeko microphone yo kale mbuuzeko n'omulala. So Betty, you've been burning. You're trying to answer the question that I had asked earlier, but you've been sending your answers in the comment section. So I'm going to ask that you answer the question now, but verbally. So turn on your microphone, turn on your video, and answer the question. Okay.
Yes, Toko.
Yes, please. Since you're still with us, I want to ask you this question. What lessons do farmers like yourself draw from COVID-19, the lockdown, and all the resultant problems that came with it? You know, economists like Muhire will say that when there's a problem, there's also at least one lesson you pick from it. So 20 years from now, 10 years from now, what lessons should farmers like you pick out of this that can then help you better your experience and experiment as farmers going forward in that trade?
Thank you very much, Toko. I think I'm very clear. There are a host of lessons that we've picked, and I'm so sure that those that will come 20 years, like you've put it, or if we manage to live up to 20 years, we will draw a few pieces from what has transpired in especially these last 2 years. I'll honestly tell you that planning is also so important because, for example, I knew of this COVID in around December 2019. Actually, I was playing on my phone. I like reading a lot. So some Chinese had written about it and said that, you know what is happening in Wuhan? If this virus spreads all over the world, airports are going to close. People are going to stay at home. But most importantly, they will have to eat. They will need food. So as I sat down trying to think, okay, so if the virus comes in Uganda, then they're going to lock down in Teve, people are going to stay home and they'll have to eat. But when Mugezi goes to the garden, and that's how actually I started my farming journey. Though I used to do farming as a joking thing, as something as a by the way. But you see, after reading that piece, I sat down, planned, I said, okay, now, what can I grow? But you see, in that very piece, the gentleman talked about some of the foods that people should eat. He talked about the citruses, lemons, then tomatoes, like how these doctors have been advising us to eat those immunity boosting foods, onions. So I went for onions, you get? But because you see, I had read it somewhere, I started planning. We need to plan. We need to plan. We need to research about markets. I'll tell you, there is a very huge market. I've been listening to, I think, this other panelist, Zawedde, talking about government at Yambe. let me tell you, honestly, Toko, this government has nothing that's going to help farmers or people in the markets. I don't think whether it even has an idea. A government that has failed to provide pads for young children. Actually, as we talk now, I think there is a tax on Ethernet. Yes, a tax on Ethernet. And then at the same time, they are saying that no, kids should stay home and study online. So I really don't think that there is a program as per anything to help out farmers. But I am only praying that President Museveni peddles deeply into the politics of Kenya. Now, a year from now, Kenyans are going to have another president. Uhuru Kenyatta is not coming back. And the president which is there, usually the elections has a lot of energy and a lot of money flying around. So people don't go to the gardens. So if more farmers invested time in research and finding new market, the Kenyan market is going to be virgin. Those Kenyans are not going to farm. Okay? So if you positioned so well and looked at the Kenyan situation, I am so certain that we can try even actually to help the economy, because when we sell, we get the money coming through and then do other things. There is also the other fact of what Francis also talked about, going back to poverty. It has also been a lesson. We've seen so many farmers losing out a lot of money. For us, we made losses in the watermelons. And you see...
Unmute.
John, please continue talking. Someone had unmuted and now she has muted.
Oh, okay.
Continue submitting.
So many people, so many farmers have gone back to zero. I'll tell you honestly. The drought, the lockdown have hit us so badly. And I'll tell you, for example, you know, the November, beginning 1st November, people, those who are into horticulture like me, that's when we plant tomatoes. Yeah? So somebody who had planted maize the first season, targeting the drought season, the dry season of November going forward up to around February, has lost out, because you see the maize, the drought hits the maize. So they don't have, the drought hits the maize, then the lockdown, then there is also UNBS that is busy arresting people. So do aflatoxins. They need meals to be stainless steel. I really don't know who plans for this country, because you see, a stainless steel meal is something very, very expensive. So I'll tell you honestly that people have gone back to poverty, and there is a hustle of breaking the poverty cycle. But when you break it and sprout, then you go back. I don't think whether coming out again can be possible. So, but of course, some of the lessons have been negative, because we weren't prepared for the lockdowns. The president also came out, and this really, I commend him, though I think at that time he was under pressure because there was an election that was coming through. When he did, like how the American president Roosevelt was doing those, they call them fire chats, something like evening fire chats, something like that. You know, he was updating the country and advising the country. You know, in such times, the people tend to look at their leaders, they tend to listen to them. And, you know, we have been so obedient all through. But he has developed, I don't know whether now that the election is done, he has become so complacent. I don't know whether he no longer cares, but we need something to keep us hopeful.
Okay, John, I actually saw he has the PS just announced that the president has another address, I think on Saturday. Maybe he's getting back to those old days of giving the country hope and all. But before you go, I want to also ask you what I asked of the previous speaker. Assuming that the president or the government asked you what a comprehensive plan for recovery post-COVID should look like, what would be your answer? What are those key things that you think shouldn't miss out, that the government should look at and say, if we are to help farmers because who have been affected by COVID, these are the key areas we should look at.
You know, Toko, you asked me a question that so many Ugandans have spent a lot of energy attempting to advise government and so on and so forth. To me, honestly speaking, I don't think whether this government has any plan whatsoever of helping. I don't know. I think I'm just pessimistic. But anyway, let me not go down that drain. First things first. I will still borrow Francis's submission of opening up the country. You know, this virus, I was one time listening to Vesige. You know, Vesige is a scientist. Dr. Kanokiza Vesige is a scientist. He said that at some point, he said that we will all eventually get COVID. And our bodies will build immunity. So what we need to do, and what government needs to do, especially the president, because you see, when you are a leader, the problem is that the president also gives up easily. There is a time when he was talking about, you know, I think they were supposed to give out radios to school-going children in the first lockdown, and then I think guys ate the money, and then he said, "I've left them to God." Now, if the president comes through, he needs to be coming through regularly to talk to the people, to talk to his people, his constituents must listen to him, to instill hope, to renew their courage, their hope. Because we need, what we need now, this government is not going to give anybody free money. No, it doesn't have. It is also poor. But you see, if the president comes out regularly to renew our hope, tell us, look, okay, this has happened, but it has not only happened in Uganda, it has happened, it's world over, but we can pick up ourselves and then we get going. So that, to me, that is the most important thing. We need that word of encouragement to instill hope in us, and we can get going. You know, we've been through a lot, and somehow we managed to navigate. So to me, I don't want to go through Mala this, Mala government this, because it's not going to do it. It cannot do it. What I can only say is that the president and other leaders should start coming. And actually, like Toko and the entire team at CCG, coming out to have these interactions, to share experiences, and then renew people's hope. I think, to me, that's the most important thing. Toko, I don't want to go into the business of government do this, government do this. No. I am not
okay.
in there.
Okay, thank you. Betty, are you now here with us? Can you unmute your microphone?
Yes.
Okay, since you're here with us and you head a society like the Acholi Society,
You can talk.
turn off, don't mind, you could turn off your video, because sometimes turning on the video means it affects the network. Just turn off your video and leave the microphone on. Maybe that will make it better. Okay, so, hello, Betty? If I was saying, if the problem persists, you could turn off your, yeah, that's better now.
Hello?
I can hear you, Betty. Betty,
Yeah,
here is your question.
I have a network issues, the network problem. That is why.
That's okay. So I'm going to just ask you a question that you'll attempt. Let's hope that the network will allow you to.
Network is disturbing.
Yeah, that we know the network in this country tends to disturb everywhere. Betty, we can hear you. This is your question. How can societies like yours work with government to ensure that to uplift people out of this COVID-19 menace? How can we work with? How can the government work with you? How can it work with the NGOs and other stakeholders in this country to get the country out of this and the businesses especially out of the problems that have been induced by COVID-19?
Sorry for the question. You asked the question again.
Okay, let me ask you again. How can your society, the one where you head, and others like NGOs, how can they work with government to ensure that your society, you're the chairperson of the Acholi Community Society. How can that society and NGOs, civil society as a whole, work with government to help businesses and members of the community out of COVID-19? Betty, seems we are going to lose you. Betty, seems we are going to lose you. Okay, let me ask Muhire, whose network seems more stable as we get Betty sorted. Mr. Muhire, your network has been superb, and that is impressive in this country where you can never always guarantee that. So I'm going to ask you, how should a national comprehensive economic recovery plan, if any, designed by this government look like that then helps the economy out of this crisis that we are in?
Thank you, the moderator. Well, for us, we can always recommend, but the government that implements. So far, when you look at what the government has done, so far has not really, solved the intended or met the intended goal. First of all, the government through the central bank reduced the central bank rate from 9 to 6.5, but it has not, helped. Why? Even if the central bank rate is reduced to 0, so that let's say SMEs or micro enterprises can get cheap credit, still they will not get that done, because we are talking of the financial sector of Uganda, which is more of a oligopolistic in terms of its market structure. And you would expect the government, let's say, to bring in tax relief right now, but instead we've seen the government introducing new taxes. And so other things it has tried to do. You saw in the last financial year, the government allocated around 555 billion to UDB, to help struggling SMEs. But at the end of the day, when they received the money in the name of, of helping the struggling SMEs, after receiving the money, UDB came out and said, no, this money was never intended for struggling SMEs. So the government knows where the problem is or how it can help its citizens, but unfortunately it has not done the right thing. So for me, this is my opinion, what I think the government should do. The government should come up with a mechanism that, or the strategy that is all about boosting aggregate demand and employment. And that's what we mean, what we call a stimulus package. A stimulus package looks at boosting the economy through increasing aggregate demand and creating employment opportunities. What we had in Uganda, we've never had a stimulus package. What they were calling the stimulus package was never a stimulus package at all. So the government should come up with a stimulus package that will boost aggregate demand. That is by increasing household incomes and also creating employment opportunities. So talking about boosting aggregate demand, here that means that you're going to make sure that the money you put in the economy will reach the last person, the common Ugandan, not putting or allocating money and it is hijacked, through corruption. For example, last year, according to the police's annual report of 2020, we lost over 11.7 trillion shilling. That is a quarter of the national budget. So you can imagine that money was stolen. It was meant to be reaching up to the grassroots, up to the last Ugandan or the common Ugandan. But you can imagine all that money was stolen. If you follow up, still those people, the culprits, are out there freely walking. The same thing with that 555 shilling that was put into UDB. It ended up being, taken by a clique of a few firms. And when you talk of putting money in UDB, most of Ugandans are largely into micro and small enterprises. So the money was actually taken by medium enterprises. And when you talk of medium enterprises, very few Ugandans are into medium enterprises. These are largely owned by foreign investors. And these ones, already they have not been hit hard as those who are into micro and small enterprises. So the government really has to look at those strategies, how the money can reach the final person. You saw MUBS, I call it the biggest scam we've ever had in this country. First of all, it came during a long time during elections and was hijacked as a campaign tool for the government. So that is on the way how the government can avail or increase household incomes. About employment opportunities, as I've said, that over 300 firms have closed, have shut down, and others have laid off their employees. So, and we're talking about an employment where we have over 2.5 million people who have lost their jobs. So how can the government ensure that these firms, these whether small or micro or medium enterprises, hire more people or even recall those they have already laid off? It cannot do this by giving, let's say, a tax relief, which should be part of this comprehensive plan. Offer a tax relief, and as you give this tax relief to these firms, give them a condition that bring those people you had, are laid off, or even don't lay other people. But you've seen the government instead introducing new taxes, and we're in a pandemic. The world last had a pandemic in 1918. So this is about 100 years ago. These things don't happen every time. So the government should put in place such a mechanism like tax relief, come and help these businesses to stay afloat. Then the other point is that the government should come up with this plan that has a component of sustainable safety net program. What do I mean by sustainable? As I told you that an economy is a system. It operates as a system. You have to make sure that people have money, people have incomes to spend on goods and services. So you saw the government in the first lockdown, they gave, let's say, food safety nets, and this was only last for 10 days, but we ended up being in a lockdown for over 3 months. You've seen the second lockdown, the government only gave 100,000 shillings for 42 days. So meaning that on average each day, this household is going to be spending around 2,300. But 42 days are now done. Those vulnerable poor people, what are they eating? Remember, still affect the farmer. Even these workers who work in the bars, or who used to work in the bars. So the government should not only be giving these safety nets for just, let's say, 10 days or 42 days. The pandemic is still here. The vulnerable poor people have not stopped being vulnerable after 42 days. So the government should come up with that wide or sustainable safety net program, and it should be rapid. So that's all I can say about the comprehensive plan. However, the question is always about resources. The government will be saying, yes, we are broke, we don't have money. So if the government, you saw the Minister of Finance saying that schools should sell their yes, property because they cannot, the government is broke. But it all starts with how the government allocates its resources. When the budget was read for this financial year, it had nothing to do with COVID-19. So what does that tell? That our planning mechanism in this country, we have a problem. Either we have good planners, but they are hijacked by politicians, because you have to know that politics in this country override economics. So when you look at that budget, it was like as if there is no pandemic. It's like as if we are not in a pandemic. That's why immediately after 2 weeks, they realized that actually the second wave was at its peak. That's when they came out and said we need a supplementary budget. But what does that tell you? In the pandemic, you plan after realizing that a wave is at its peak. So we also have that issue. So the issue is about resources. They will tell you, the government will tell you, we are broke, but we are buying cars for MPs. We have the biggest parliament, of 529 members. You have a cabinet of 80 ministers. One would think that the bigger the size of the government, the better in terms of a service delivery, which is actually, on the contrary, which is not the case. So borrowed around $832 million last year during the first wave. We got money from IMF, World Bank, and Development Bank. Also received around 1.1 billion in form of grants or aid from different agencies. Those are foreign agencies, and also received 29 billion shillings. The Ugandans generously donated, and you understand that money is still they say it is on the account there, yet we thought it was going to help, in the first wave. So the question, the government said they don't have money for important things like these ones, but when it comes to spending on themselves, to spend on its government size. I mean, when you look at the budget for this financial year, you have over 46% of the budget going to salaries and non-salaries for the government, because we have one of the biggest, government in terms of the size, and this comes at a cost. And it also depends on how you arrange your priorities. In this country, government and security seem to be more important than education, agriculture, and other important sectors. For example, when you look at the allocations, on the 7th, in fact, this time, to make sure that a common Ugandan doesn't understand what's going on, this time they combined education and health as one sector by calling it human capital development sector, and it was only allocated 17%. 17%, you're talking of 10 education sector, 7 to health. That's how it has been, meaning that there was no change. And we saw security taking about 15.6%, then 34% going to debt repayment. So in other words, it is debt repayment and the security that are taking the biggest or the lion's share of the budget. So the government has to rearrange its priorities so that we invest in the most important sectors. The most important sectors, we are talking of education and health. When you talk of education, that's where research and development starts from. The government is supposed to be investing in in basic research, because it is very expensive. And when you talk of basic research, you're looking at, coming up with, solving issues, let's say by developing the vaccine yourself. Today, even if the government has money to buy vaccines, it cannot get the vaccines because there's a lot of economics behind the vaccines, So even if the government has money, they cannot get the vaccine. That's why it will take us a long time, or we'll be in position to get all the vaccines we need, even if you have money, when all other developed economies have gotten theirs, because they have already booked, they have hoarded. So the developing economies like Uganda will get served, they will have to get served last. So the government has to, as I've said, has to arrange its priorities. When you talk of health, when you go to public hospitals, when you look at the public health infrastructure, it is almost completely broken down. You go to the public hospitals, they don't have enough medicine. And Ugandans who are already frustrated, they don't have money, they are spending the little they have, on medical bills. So the government has to invest in those two key sectors. It has to prioritize them so that it will be in a position to get big masses of people out of poverty. Thank you.
Mr. Muhire, you've mentioned the priorities, but you've mentioned it in the bigger scheme of the budget as a whole. Now, I want to ask you that, economically speaking, we've learned from COVID that we are not going to continue doing business as usual. We're not going to continue doing things as usual. If you were to advise the government, do you think that there are particular sectors or particular ways of doing business that we should focus on and invest more in going forward? If so, what are those particular ways of doing business or those particular sectors that not sectors, particular economic areas that government should look at and prioritize more going forward?
Just as I've said, your question is not a bit clear. Is it you're talking about the part of economics or certain businesses or sectors?
Like you had said, you had talked about the sectors and the need to invest more in sectors like education that will then have research and spur innovation and all these things. So I'm looking at it from the business alone, business perspective. So we have, like, let's say, online business and the physical businesses. We have agriculture, you could say that, and industry and all these. So do you think there is a particular, first of all, way of doing business, say like perhaps virtual business, that government can prioritize? And do you think that there are particular sorts of businesses that they can prioritize that can then bring a more resilient economy going forward, that even COVID coming or something even more dangerous than that would not affect us as much as this has done?
Thank you. looking at the current situation, the government actually has to come up with a way of not only rescuing, rescuing or recovery, but rebuilding and, talking of resilience. That's what the government should be looking at. Because as I've said, COVID is going to be here for a long time. And it's a matter of time that everyone is going to realize that, yeah, we have to live with this, disease, whether we want or not. Prioritizing some businesses over others is not a good idea, because as I've said, an economy is like a system. If one component is locked, it's not working, then even what you think should be prioritized over it, you're going to realize is also going to be, affected. So I don't support that. However, how should businesses react? How should they adjust and adopt the new norm? That should be the question. First of all, currently the world is going through the fourth industrial revolution, which is all about artificial intelligence. And when you talk of artificial intelligence, you're talking about internet data, which is like a catalyst for what is going on. You're talking of a digital world economy. You saw in China where this COVID-19 broke out from. They were their production came to a halt like just for 3 weeks. So it was not even 1 month. And immediately, because for them they have invested in education and health, meaning research and development, immediately after 1 month, they had gone back to production. And that's why the economic growth is currently at around 9%, though they wish to be at 12, operating at 12%. So the government has put mechanisms or the infrastructure that allows, the businesses to operate and adjust and adopt to the new norm. And as I've said, it all starts with, let's say, data. Data is a big catalyst for what is going on. You've seen MSMEs trying to reach their customers online. But unfortunately, you're increasing data. You're introducing more taxes on internet data instead of the government doing the opposite. So that's the challenge we have. But this is the time for everyone, not only businesses, but even individuals, even schools, to embrace the new norm, which is about digital economy, doing business online, and doing almost everything virtually as long as you can. And when you talk of the service sector the biggest part can easily be done virtually. So the government has to build the infrastructure, and in terms of internet data, in terms of IT, so that Uganda doesn't lose out. Uganda and Africa at large, we lost out, from the first industrial revolution, second industrial revolution, third, and even the fourth, we might lose out if the governments continue doing the opposite. Instead of facilitating, instead they are discouraging people from, embracing this. When the government introduced OTT, just in 3 months, over 30% of internet users dropped out. So you can imagine with this more discouraging taxes, we're talking about 12%, which is additional to 18% VAT on internet data, which makes it 30%. I mean, internet data is expensive in Uganda. So the government has to look at these issues and know that if, however much you want to collect tax, if it has not facilitated people to make money, then it will not even get these taxes it's looking for. Thank you.
Hello, Mr. Muhire, I'll end with you. Give us your parting shots. Then we move to the other 3 panelists to also give us their parting shots, and we call it a day.
Thank you. Everyone should be aware that COVID is going to be here. It's going to be here. The lockdown will not help. However, each person or an individual, they should be, take responsibility for their own health, follow the SOPs, and go out there and work. Otherwise, people will die from home because of hunger and depression. Thank you.
Okay, let's move to John. John, the farmer, what are your parting shots today?
Thank you, Toko. Thank you for hosting us, and CCG plus all the panelists. Thank you so much for hosting us. We should have these engagements and as we chat away forward. To everyone who is watching and listening in, keep safe. Make sure that you mask up. Make sure that you sanitize regularly, you social distance, but also make sure but you survive in these 5-9 years. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Toko.
Thank you very much, John. Mama Zawedde tugenda kubuuza nti olinayo kyotugamba ekisembayo kyonna mu dakiika ng'emu kitubulire.
Hello.
Tukuwulira mama. Tukuwulira bulungi.
Ompulidde?
Yes, nkuwulidde.
Neyanziza gavumenti n'ekirala pulezidenti eggwanga likwatagane bulungi ne ba NGOs kubanga ffe bebaale abantu bakolagana n'abantu ba wansi. Kaakati yanziza nnyo abantu bonna mbakubira omulanga bagoberere ebiragiro ebyateekebwawo Ministry of Health basobole okwekuuma COVID n'endwadde endala basobole okuzeekuuma. Twagala tukolere wamu okulaba nga tusitula eggwanga lyaffe. Tweyanziza nnyo tuwa omukisa guno ogw'okwanja ebizibu byaffe byonna kubanga singa singa naffe tetumanyiddwa era singa tetweyogerako. Tweyanziza ba NGOs bonna abavaayo ne batuyambako nga ffe ba street vendors okututeeka ku musana kubanga singa teyali NGOs singa ffenna tetumanyikiddwa. Nsaba gavumenti ekwatagana ne NGOs bulungi basobole okukwasaganya ensonga ezitwala eggwanga mu maaso. Neyanziza nnyo neyanzeege.
Weebale nnyo maama nawe tukusima nnyo tuwa obudde bwo.
Hello.
Era kati mbadde ngamba nti weebale nnyo tuwa obudde bwo. Hello? Okay. Betty, your network has included mama. Oyogedde bulungi. Betty, your network deprived us the chance of listening to your good points. But I will just request that you've listened into the discussion. Kindly give us your parting shots and we call it quits. Thank you very much. Our dear esteemed viewers, we look forward to having you next week on the same channel with another discussion. We hope to be more engaging at that time. Thank you.